Hello there. My name is Nathan, and I'm the editor of the Mouths of Madness podcast. And this is a new show we've started called Editor's Notes, in which I will be expressing my thoughts on the films that the main podcast covers. Episode 4 of Mouths of Madness is a review of the 2017 Christmas horror comedy Better Watch Out. It's a wildly inventive film with clever and unexpected twists and turns that will keep you on your toes for the entirety of its runtime. I hate it with a burning passion.
Want to put her in the mood? Watch a horror movie.
Dude, she's like twice our age. I really don't think it's gonna happen.
You are breathtaking.
Thank you. Now don't stay up and watch scary movies, okay? It'll give you nightmares again.
So what do you want to do?
Ricky, why can't you just leave me alone?
He's such a jerk.
Don't hang up on me.
What was that? Oh my God.
Get away from the window.
There's someone there.
It's a little bit unfortunate that the first episode of this show is going to be about this movie. I have very strong negative opinions about it, as it's a horror that isn't scary and a comedy that isn't funny. I would have preferred to start with a movie I like, but hey, what can you do, I suppose? Also, this is a film that can't be thoroughly reviewed without spoiling the big twist, which is also spoiled in the trailer, by the way. But I do want to be clear that my opinion is firmly in the minority here. Better Watch Out is generally well regarded by both critics and horror films alike. So you may want to watch it unspoiled. And if you do, you probably should watch it before watching this movie. Believe it or not, I will also be spoiling Game of Thrones. So the setup here is for a pretty typical babysitter home invasion flick a la Halloween or When a Stranger Calls, except that the 12-year-old child, Luke, is in love with his 18-year-old babysitter, Ashley, and badly wants to bang her. Yeah, if that seems like a bad twist on the babysitter trope, that's because it is. It's exactly as uncomfortable as you would expect it to be.
It's the most inappropriate thing ever.
So the first 20 minutes of the film feels like they last for an hour and a half because they endlessly repeat themselves. Ashley is awkwardly hit on by Luke, who, by the way, looks 15 and is taller than she is, though that doesn't make any of this less uncomfortable.
So why won't you kiss me?
Then Ashley talks on the phone with her boyfriend. The two of them are angry at each other for some unspecified reason. Then she gets off the phone and Luke awkwardly hits on her some more. Rinse, repeat. The acting is wooden. The dialogue is unnatural. The characters are poorly developed and boring when they're not being annoying. More on that later, trust me. Then what you believe to be the meat of the film begins. There's a series of strange and spooky events. Pizza that wasn't ordered is delivered. A Santa statue is found out of place. Strange noises are heard. But then, Luke's friend Garrett shows up and laughs about all of his hilarious pranks. Luke and Ashley sounded so scared. But no, it's a fake out. They hear something upstairs, and Garrett is only responsible for some of the scary events that happened. There really is someone breaking into the house. It's all of your overdone horror tropes prevalent in the genre since the 1970s in one 5 to 10 minute sequence. To be fair, it's done like this on purpose to set you up for what happens later, but for me, that doesn't make it any less groan-inducing. There really isn't much to say about the home invasion sequence that follows. It's mostly boring. Garrett dies fairly quickly. Some guy with a shotgun wanders around the house aimlessly. Characters talk and whisper when they shouldn't. Luke gets a gun from his parents' bedroom, and Ashley lets him wield it for some reason. Seriously, why does she let him do that? His trigger and muzzle discipline are abhorrent. And I know he looks older because of bad casting, but he's supposed to be 12. Here's where we get into major spoiler territory. If you want to watch this movie unspoiled, you should definitely stop watching this video now. So the whole home invasion thing turns out to be a ruse. Garrett's actually alive, and he's the guy with the gun. Luke set it all up so he could be the hero, hoping that Ashley would suddenly become a file and start sucking his dick. So Ashley starts to angrily yell at him about how gross and weird this is, because it is weird and gross. But Luke gets angry in turn, and that's when this movie takes a sudden left turn.
Ashley!
What?
Well, this certainly isn't what I was expecting. Of course, that's just because I didn't watch the trailer that spoils everything. Yeah. Apparently, this is an evil kid movie. I have to admit, when this twist happened, my interest was suddenly piqued. I thought I was watching a mediocre home invasion movie, and this actually seemed like an inventive twist. It put me off guard. I no longer had any idea where this was going, and I was really curious about where it could go. Unfortunately, what followed went completely off the rails, and if it had been a mediocre home invasion movie, it would have been better off. I could have just watched it and then forgotten about it. Instead, I hate it to the point where I have to make this fucking video. All right, so the actual events of the rest of the movie aren't really the problem. In fact, for the most part, the rest of the story is barely even worth talking about. There's a cat and mouse game between Ashley and Luke. She escapes, he catches her. Garrett isn't so sure about any of this and spends most of the movie being scared and rambling on about how he and Luke are going to jail. Ashley's boyfriend shows up. Luke home alones him to death.
Dad, put it down!
Okay.
Remember when I said this was supposed to be a horror comedy? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what's supposed to be funny. Billy from Stranger Things shows up at one point and dies shortly afterward. Whatever. None of it is interesting, and none of it really justifies how much I hate this movie, or even any emotion at all more than detached boredom. No. The problem here is Luke. Luke is why I hate this movie. He's an annoying little bitch from the very beginning.
So why won't you kiss me?
And there's nothing scary about him at all. He struts around with a shit-eating grin, ordering people around and doing whatever he feels like with no consequence, like the asshole rich kid incel that he is.
Go take a walk and chill the fuck out.
He thinks he's the coolest and smartest person in the room, when in reality, he's just an entitled child that got a hold of a gun. The very first thing he does with his newfound power over Ashley is start feeling up her breast while she's tied up. That's right, there's a scene in this movie where a 12-year-old commits a sexual assault. No, it's not handled deftly enough to not be offensive. This is supposed to be a horror comedy. So during the video edit, I realized I wasn't making myself particularly clear here, and it just sounds like I'm complaining about there being upsetting material in a horror movie. I can assure you that's not the case. There are plenty of movies that I enjoy that contain this type of material, but it's treated differently. This movie is not Deliverance. This movie is not I Saw the Devil. When you combine the tone of this movie with this material, it's a disaster. You know, this movie is trying really hard to be a fun and irreverent horror movie like Scream. It bills itself as Home Alone if the theories about Kevin McAllister being a psychopath were actually true. And that just does not combine well with this material. Right after the act, there is dialogue immediately that is played for laughs. You know, Luke might as well compare her breast to a bag of sand to reference the 40-year-old virgin. Then Luke gets an erection and Garrett makes fun of him for it. And that's supposed to be funny. And the whole thing just feels gross in a way that you don't want a horror movie to feel gross. More like it's not what I'm seeing on screen that's gross. It's the person who wrote it that is gross. I felt the presence of a writer I don't want to hang out with.
Kind of threatens to go in a lot of taboo areas. You know, it could have been
Threatens?
very masochistic. It could have been, you know, there's a subject matter that that everyone can relate to, but it kind of goes there. And my goal was to, you know, like threaten to go there, but then be funny, and then like, oh, that's not gonna happen. Oh, I'm laughing now, and then make you feel real bad for laughing.
You know, this scene made me want to turn the movie off And I would have turned the movie off had the podcast not been covering it. And that's really saying something, because I have watched I Spit on Your Grave all the way through 3 times. But the way this was handled, while far less disturbing on the face of it, far less disturbing in terms of what was shown on screen, felt more disturbing in how it's being treated. And not by the characters on screen, but by the writers who wrote it, if that makes any sense. He's like an angry chihuahua. Does an angry chihuahua bite? Yes. Is an angry chihuahua dangerous? Also yes. Are you afraid of the angry chihuahua? No, of course not. It's a chihuahua. You can punt it across the room if you have to. Just like Luke, it's just irritating and maybe even anger-inducing. Now, to be clear, there's no doubt in my mind that my feelings toward Luke are exactly what's intended by the filmmakers. The problem here isn't that they didn't achieve their goal with this character. And what makes that crystal clear is the victims react to him in exactly the same way I'm reacting to him. They constantly condescend to him and insult him under their breath. They know he's no psychotic mastermind, though he is psychotic. No, they think he's an annoying little shit too. He doesn't scare them. They just want out of his game.
Sorry, kiddo. I'm not involving anyone else in your bullshit.
So, I bet you were wondering how the hell I'd fit Game of Thrones spoilers into a video about this movie. Luke is just discount Joffrey Baratheon. You see, the filmmakers want Luke to be the child you love to hate, just like Joffrey Baratheon from Game of Thrones. Unfortunately, unlike Joffrey, I didn't love to hate Luke. I hated to hate him, and that made me hate the movie. And that made me hate the room that I was watching the movie in. And that made me hate the house that contained the room that I was watching the movie in. And that made me hate the world that contained the house that contained the room that I was watching the movie in. And now I'm realizing that I have to scrub through a bunch of footage of this movie in order to do the edit because I decided to make this video. And that makes me hate myself. Do you see what you've done to me, Daniel?
Better watch out.
Oh, wow.
Better watch out.
That was one of mine.
Christmas movie. Wow.
Anyway, man-child rants aside, Joffrey Baratheon is one of the greatest villains in television history. Just like Luke, he's an entitled, immature, pathetic, and violent narcissist. Also, just like Luke, he has a gun. Except that his gun takes the form of the throne of the land of Westeros, which he inherited from his father, Robert Baratheon. May that badass rest in peace.
Thank the gods for Bessie and her tits.
He is cruel and vindictive, and he murders and tortures people with impunity for fun. There are few legal consequences for kings in Westeros, so if he wants to decapitate his fiance's father and then force her to stare at the severed head, well, that's just what he gets to do.
How long do I have to look?
As long as it pleases me.
He was also a pathetically insecure coward. He delegates any dangerous tasks to others, and he pisses himself crying anytime he himself is put into danger. Often that danger is of his own making, caused by either his cruelty or his incompetence. All this made him so hated by the fan base of the show that when he died as a result of choking on his own vomit and his tongue due to being poisoned, and remember, he's a child, fans rejoiced and cheered like their favorite football team had just won the Super Bowl. But here's the rub. Joffrey made Game of Thrones better. People loved to hate him. So why is it that Joffrey is part of what made Game of Thrones great, and Luke completely ruins what could have otherwise have been a, well, let's face it, just sort of mediocre to all right film? This is the question that actually inspired me to create this video series, and I want to explore it. Obviously, Joffrey is one of the most memorable characters in Game of Thrones. Everything he does has an impact, either on the plot of the show or on the emotional state of the audience. I was particularly upset when he killed my favorite hooker.
I don't want to pay for it.
Get yourself a wife.
So if you've seen the show, when you think of Game of Thrones villains, you probably think of Joffrey. This might lead you to believe that he was one of the main characters, with a lot of screen time. He was introduced in the very first episode of the show and died in season 4, episode 3. That's a grand total of 43 hours of the show during which he is alive and active in the plot. And he has a grand total of, drumroll please, 1 hour and 7 minutes of screen time. In fact, out of those 43 episodes, he was only actually in 26, and he had an average screen time of 2.5 minutes per episode that he was in. For comparison's sake, Ned Stark had a total of 1 hour and 40 minutes of screen time, more than a half an hour more screen time than Joffrey. This was despite him only being alive for 10 episodes of the show. This was almost definitely done on purpose. A character like Joffrey, as compelling as he was, is only tolerable in small doses. An entire hour-long episode dedicated to Joffrey would likely be unwatchable. Better Watch Out is the equivalent of an entire episode of Game of Thrones being dedicated to Joffrey. I'm not willing to scrub through this movie any more than I have to, so I'm not going to find out exactly how much screen time Luke has, and it's not readily available information on the internet, but I'm willing to bet that Luke has almost as much screen time in an hour and a half long movie as Joffrey does in 43 hours of Game of Thrones. And it's insufferable. If you're going to make a character that completely unlikable, so utterly detestable, you have to limit audience exposure. Otherwise, what you end up with is just someone scratching nails on a chalkboard for an hour and a half and calling that a movie. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, how would you go about limiting the exposure to this character without changing the entire plot of the film? Now, I'm no expert. I've never written a script or a screenplay in my life. However, I would say the answer to that question is you probably don't. If you read your script back and realize that you've railroaded yourself into having a character like this on screen for the entire duration of your movie, you should just stop writing it, move on, write a different movie, preferably one that doesn't suck.
Yeah, it's the villain of the movie within about 5 minutes. You're kind of like, I can't help but root for him to get away with it.
While Joffrey is king and rarely faces any consequences for his actions, he does actually have a foil, a worthy opponent, if you will. Prince Tyrion Lannister, expertly played by Peter Dinklage.
That wizard came from the moon.
He's smarter than Joffrey, and he outwits and manipulates him every step of the way. He gets away with saying basically whatever he wants to him. Joffrey hates him for it. What's worse for the little shit is that for reasons too complicated to get into here, there actually would be consequences for simply disposing of Prince Tyrion the way he does so many other people. It doesn't happen particularly often. Tyrion does sometimes dispense with some comeuppance to the boy when he feels it's needed.
You're talking to a king!
And now I've struck a king. Did my hand fall from my wrist?
These are perhaps the most satisfying scenes involving Joffrey in the series. I would argue they're even more satisfying than his death scene. When he dies, it's over. He's dead. That's generally how dying works. Here, though, he's suffering and embarrassed and sad. You can see the pain in his pathetic little eyes. Kudos to Jack Gleason, the actor who plays Joffrey, for being able to really sell that. So anyway, what I'm saying here is that if you're going to have discount Joffrey, you have to have discount Tyrion to dish out some sort of discipline, or his character is going to make for an unwatchable film. It's like watching some little shit misbehaving and screaming in a McDonald's with zero pushback from his parents. Ashley simply isn't up to the job the way Tyrion was. Luke's more clever than she is, and she's constantly under his power. He outplays her every step of the way. Anytime she escapes, he simply catches her. He's never embarrassed. He's never hurt. There's one part where Ashley's boyfriend looks like he's about to have the upper hand, and Luke pathetically curls up into a fetal position. But Garrett shows up with a shotgun and it's back to business. Luke knocks the dude out and goes back to doing his stupid, annoying ass little ego dance that he must have learned from an outtake from the Joker movie. God, I hate this kid. Ashley and her boyfriend make some quips at his expense every now and then, but they just go over his head, or he threatens her into shutting up with a gun. The audience is never allowed any actual satisfaction in his comeuppance whatsoever. Again, it's insufferable and annoying. I don't quite understand how anyone could enjoy this. It has an 88% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, and I fail to see what any of those critics saw in this. Even if Luke was less annoying, the rest of the movie doesn't really rise above mediocre in any way. The audience score is lower at 64%, but even that seems real high to me. There's never the adrenaline rush of fear because Luke's not scary. I never laughed because it's not funny. And there's no satisfaction because the shitty little bully never gets what he's got coming to him. And he's on the screen for the entire damn movie. That is, until the very end, of course. You see, he thinks he's killed Ashley. He thinks he's going to successfully pin all the murder on Ashley's ex-boyfriend, who he killed and then staged his body to look like a suicide. But Ashley had something up her sleeve.
This one's still alive!
Okay, wait. Okay, honey, just stay here. Hey, just stay here.
Vitals are holding. What do we got? Stab wound to the neck. She put duct tape on to stem the bleeding.
Smart girl. Saved her life.
Let's go.
You know, I'd rather have seen the little shit get his head caved in, but knowing he is going to get his legally off camera is better than nothing, I guess. I still didn't like the movie, but the ending could have been worse. You see, I was really worried that this was going to be one of those horror movies where the bad guy wins, where, you know, Jigsaw says game over. That's an all too common trope in modern horror movies. I'm actually getting a little bit sick of it at this point. So thankfully, it avoided that trap. If you're interested in getting other perspectives on this movie, I would suggest listening to the main Mouths of Madness podcast that went up on this channel before this video did. I'm sure Kevin Logan, Dan, and Bearclaw have plenty to say about this movie, because whether you like it or not, there is plenty to say about this movie. So I guess that's an accomplishment in its own way. I'm just glad that the movie ended on a reasonably positive note, and that the kid is definitely not going to get away with this. Roll credits.
I'm worried about Ashley. I think we should go to the hospital.
I fucking hate this movie. No, seriously, what the fuck were they thinking with that mid-credits scene? She's going straight to the ICU. There's a literal 0% chance he gets in there before she spills the beans. But here, the filmmakers are suggesting that there's a possibility that he might win, that he might get away with this, that he might be able to get into that hospital and kill her. Why? Is it to annoy me? Is it to annoy me specifically? My fucking God. And please stop doing mid-credit scenes to begin with. They're bad. There's nothing good about them anymore. Marvel played that out a decade ago at this point.